The rain wasn't just falling. It was punishing the pavement of the high-rise district, a rhythmic drumming that echoed the frantic beating of Jack Dawson's heart. He stood under the neon glow of the gala's porte-cochere, the expensive wool of his suit jacket soaking through, but his focus was entirely on the dead weight slumped against his shoulder. Evelyn Mulray, the CEO of Thorne Industries, a woman whose boardroom glare could freeze boiling water, was currently a ghost of herself. Her head hung low, her usually pristine blonde hair matted against her cheek, and her breath smelled of expensive scotch and a deep, soul-crushing despair that no amount of money could mask. "Just get me out of here, Jack," she had whispered earlier, her voice a jagged shard of glass. Before they all see. He hadn't asked why. He hadn't asked about the empty pill bottle he'd spotted peeking out of her silver clutch, or why she'd bypassed the champagne for the hard liquor in the VIP lounge until she couldn't stand. Jack was a man of silence. It was his greatest asset and his heaviest burden. He swung her slight frame into his arms, the silence between them louder than the thunder rolling over the city. As he carried her through the side exit to avoid the vultures of the corporate press, he felt a strange, cold shiver. This wasn't just a night of overindulgence. This was a collapse. But before we dive into the wreckage of this night and the shocking secret that waited for Jack at sunrise, I want to say a massive hello to all of you joining us today. Whether you're watching from a rainy apartment in London, a quiet suburb in Ohio, or a bustling street in Tokyo, thank you for being here. How are you all doing today? I truly hope you're finding a moment of peace in your busy lives. If you love stories that dig deep into the human heart and uncover the secrets we keep behind closed doors, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep these stories coming, and we'd love to have you as part of our growing community. Seriously, join the family, you won't want to miss what happens next. Jack placed Evelyn into the back of his modest sedan, her silk gown rustling like a dying breath. He drove in total, agonizing silence. He didn't look at her in the rearview mirror when she started to sob. Not a loud cry, but a soft, rhythmic hitching of her breath that made his knuckles turn white on the steering wheel. He was just the assistant, the fixer, the man who stayed in the shadows. He had no right to her grief. When they reached her penthouse, he carried her up the elevator, the gold-plated mirrors reflecting a version of them that looked like a tragedy in motion. He laid her on the velvet sofa, placed a glass of water on the marble coaster, and turned to leave. He didn't say good night. He didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He walked out and drove home to his cramped studio apartment, the silence of his own life finally catching up to him. He fell into a restless sleep, convinced that by 9 a.m. she would be back in her power suit, her eyes cold, the memory of her vulnerability erased by the corporate machine. He was wrong. At exactly 6:14 a.m., a frantic, heavy pounding rattled his front door. Jack stumbled out of bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He checked the peephole and the breath left his lungs. Evelyn Mulray was standing in the hallway. She wasn't wearing her power suit. She was wearing the same ruined silk dress from the night before, her makeup smeared, her feet bare on the cold linoleum. When he opened the door, the untouchable queen of Thorne Industries didn't speak. She didn't command. She simply looked at him, and as the first rays of gray morning light hit her face, a single heavy tear tracked through the dried mascara on her cheek. "I can't go back there, Jack," she choked out, her voice trembling with a terror he had never seen in another human being. "They're going to find out. They're going to find out what I did." Jack froze. The woman who held the keys to a billion-dollar empire was shaking in his doorway, and in that moment he realized that the silence he had maintained the night before wasn't a shield. It was a fuse that had just reached the powder keg. What had she done? And why, of all the people in her world of influence, was she standing at the door of the man who knew nothing about her? The silence that followed Evelyn's confession was heavier than the one in the car. Jack stood there, the cool morning draft from the hallway swirling around his ankles, looking at a woman who just yesterday had authorized a $40 million acquisition without blinking. Now she looked small. She looked like a child caught in a storm she had manufactured herself. "Come inside, Evelyn," Jack said softly, stepping back to let her pass. It was the first time he had ever used her first name without the safety of a professional title attached. It felt like a transgression, but the way she flinched at the sound of the door clicking shut told him that the old rules no longer applied. As she collapsed into his only armchair, a worn leather piece he'd found at a thrift store when he first moved to the city, Jack's mind raced. He was a man built on a foundation of discipline and invisibility. Coming from a family of coal miners in a town that had forgotten how to breathe, Jack had clawed his way into the corporate world not for the prestige, but for the safety of the shadows. His deepest desire was simple: to be indispensable but unseen. He lived in a world of ledgers and logistics because numbers didn't lie, and they didn't cry in the middle of the night. His greatest fear was being the center of a mess he couldn't fix, and looking at Evelyn now, he realized he was standing in the middle of a hurricane. "I'll make some coffee," he muttered, more to give his hands something to do than out of a need for caffeine. Evelyn watched him move through the tiny kitchenette. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room, taking in the stacks of historical biographies on his shelves and the single framed photo of his mother on the mantel. She was used to penthouses with floor-to-ceiling glass and minimalist furniture that cost more than Jack's entire education. Here the air smelled of old paper and laundry detergent. It was grounded. It was real. "You're wondering why I'm here," she said, her voice finally stabilizing, though it remained thin. "You're wondering why I didn't call a lawyer or a board member or anyone else." Jack didn't turn around. "I assumed it's because I'm the only one who doesn't talk." "It's because you're the only one who doesn't want anything from me," she countered. That was the crux of their relationship. For 3 years Jack had been her shadow. He knew her dry cleaning preferences, her allergy to lilies, and the exact temperature she liked her office. But he also knew the things she thought she hid. The way she gripped the edge of the table when her father, the legendary Noah Cross, called to belittle her achievements. He knew that she often stayed in the office until 11 p.m. not because she was a workaholic, but because she was terrified of the silence in her own home. Evelyn Mulray wasn't just a boss. She was a woman living in a gilded cage, guarded by a father who viewed her as a placeholder for the son he never had. Her motivation had always been to prove she was enough, but the cost of that proof was starting to surface. "My father, he's coming for the company, Jack," she whispered, staring into the dark swirl of the coffee he placed in front of her. "He's found the discrepancies. The ones I tried to bury to save the employees when the market dipped last year. He doesn't care about the people. He cares about the leverage." Jack felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Noah Cross was a man of immense power and even greater cruelty. If Evelyn had doctored the books, even for a noble cause, Noah wouldn't just fire her. He would destroy her. He would make sure she spent the rest of her life behind bars just to prove a point about his own legacy. "How much time do we have?" Jack asked, his protective instincts overriding his fear. Evelyn looked up, and for a fleeting second, the vulnerability was replaced by a spark of the fire that had made her a CEO. "The board meeting is in 48 hours. He's going to present the audit then." She reached out, her fingers grazing Jack's wrist. Her skin was ice cold. "I didn't just come here because you're quiet, Jack. I came here because I think you're the only person in this city who still has a soul." The weight of that statement hung between them. In the corporate world of Thorne Industries, a soul was a liability. It was something to be traded or sold. Jack looked at her hand on his arm, the contrast of her pale skin against his tan forearm, and felt a surge of something he couldn't name. It wasn't just loyalty. It was a deep, aching empathy for a woman who had everything and yet had no one to turn to but a man she barely knew outside of a spreadsheet. "By the way, I have to ask, what would you do if the person you respected most showed up at your door in a moment of total crisis? Would you step up or would you stay safe? Let me know in the comments. I love reading your takes on these dilemmas. And if you're rooting for Jack and Evelyn already, make sure you've hit that subscribe button so you can see how they navigate this minefield." As the sun began to climb higher, casting long, dramatic shadows across the room, Jack realized that his life of invisibility was over. By helping her last night, he had stepped out of the shadows. By opening the door this morning, he had stepped into her war. "We need to find the original files," Jack said, his voice firming up. "The ones your father is hiding. If we can prove he's the one who actually authorized the initial high-risk movements, the audit won't point at you. It'll point at him." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of defeat. "He keeps them at the estate. In the safe room. No one goes in there. Not even the staff." "Then we go in," Jack said. The stakes were clear now. It wasn't just about a job or a reputation. It was about survival against a man who treated people like chess pieces. Jack knew the risks. If they were caught, he wouldn't just lose his career, he could lose his freedom. But as he looked at Evelyn, seeing the woman behind the CO for the first time, he knew he couldn't go back to being just a shadow. The air in the studio apartment turned electric, the kind of heavy, charged stillness that precedes a devastating lightning strike. Jack didn't have the luxury of overthinking. In the corporate hierarchy he was a footnote, but in the realm of survival he was a strategist. He looked at Evelyn, her bare feet still tucked under her on his worn chair, and realized the clock wasn't just ticking, it was screaming. "If we're going to do this, we do it now," Jack said, his voice dropping into a low, authoritative register that made Evelyn sit up straighter. "Your father expects you to be hiding. He expects you to be paralyzed by fear. We use that." But before Jack could even grab his keys, the world outside his door reminded him that he wasn't the only one who knew how to hunt. A heavy, metallic thud echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of boots on the stairs. Not the rhythmic pace of a neighbor, but the synchronized movement of professionals. Jack's heart did a slow, painful roll in his chest. He moved to the window, peeling back the edge of the curtain just enough to see the street below. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows were idling at the curb. Men in charcoal suits, Noah Cross's private security detail, were fanning out. "He's here," Jack whispered. "What?" "No, he wouldn't come himself," Evelyn gasped, her face draining of what little color it had left. "He sends people to do his dirty work. He doesn't get his hands dirty." "He's not here to talk, Evelyn. He's here to contain the asset," Jack said, realizing the gravity of the situation. Noah Cross didn't want a public scandal, and a missing CO was a scandal. He wanted her back under his thumb, drugged or silenced until the board meeting. The first major twist hit Jack like a physical blow. As he scanned the men outside, he recognized the lead guard. It was Hollis Mulray, Evelyn's own cousin and the head of security for the estate. Hollis wasn't just there to find her. He was carrying a medical bag. They weren't taking her back to a boardroom. They were taking her to a sanitarium to be handled. "The fire escape," Jack commanded, grabbing a heavy coat and throwing it over Evelyn's shoulders. They scrambled out the window just as the lock on Jack's front door groaned under the pressure of a battering ram. The cold morning air bit at them as they descended the rusted iron stairs. Jack led her through a maze of alleyways he'd memorized during his late-night walks, his hand firmly gripping hers. Her palm was sweating, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. They ducked into a crowded 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, the smell of grease and cheap coffee providing a temporary sanctuary. They slid into a back booth, the high red vinyl hiding them from the street. "Why would Hollis be with them?" Evelyn whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. "He's family. He grew up with me." "Family is just another word for leverage to a man like your father," Jack replied. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the shattering of her reality. Then the second shock of the morning arrived. As Jack checked his phone, a notification popped up from an anonymous encrypted source he'd used months ago for background checks. It was a single image, a scanned document from 20 years ago. It was a birth certificate. Jack's breath caught. He looked from the phone to Evelyn, then back to the phone. The document wasn't for Evelyn. It was for a child Noah Cross had legally erased. A brother Evelyn never knew she had. A brother whose existence had been the reason for the original discrepancies in the Thorne Industries accounts. Noah hadn't been stealing for greed. He'd been funneling millions into a private facility to keep a dark family secret hidden. "Evelyn," Jack said, his voice trembling. "Your father isn't just protecting the company. He's protecting a ghost. And he thinks you found out. That's why he's trying to lock you away. It's not about the audit anymore. It's about a total cover-up." The stakes had just transitioned from corporate sabotage to a dangerous family conspiracy. The romantic tension that had been a faint hum in the background suddenly surged. As Evelyn leaned in to see the screen, her shoulder pressed against Jack's, and for a second their eyes locked. In her gaze, there was a terrifying mixture of horror and a sudden, desperate reliance on him. She reached out, her hand trembling as it covered his on the table. "You're the only one left, Jack," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If you leave me now, I'm dead. He'll make sure of it." Jack felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just an assistant. He was a co-conspirator in a war against one of the most powerful men in the country. "Are you guys feeling the pressure yet? Because I am." Imagine finding out your whole life, and your father's empire, was built on a lie that someone would kill to keep. What would you do? Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd run for the hills or stay and fight with Jack. And hey, if you're enjoying the suspense, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started. We aren't running anymore, Jack said, his jaw tightening. We're going to the estate. We're going to find out who that child is, and we're going to use the truth to burn your father's kingdom to the ground. The decision was made. The inciting incident had officially torn them away from their old lives. There was no going back to the office. No going back to the silence. From here on out, every move was a gamble and the price of losing was everything. The drive to the Mulray estate was a descent into a lion's den. To avoid the main highways, which Jack knew would be monitored by Noah's security network, he navigated a series of winding backroads in a beat-up rented sedan that felt like a toy compared to the armored vehicles chasing them. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in Jack's oversized coat, her eyes fixed on the passing blur of trees. The silence between them had shifted. It was no longer the professional distance of an employer and employee, but a raw, vibrating connection. "Why are you doing this, Jack?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "You could have just walked away this morning. You could have told them I was never there." Jack kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. "My father spent 40 years in the mines," he said, his voice grounded. "He followed every rule, took every bit of breath they gave him, and when his lungs gave out they replaced him in a week. I watched him die thinking he was just a number. I'm not letting that happen to you. You're not a number, Evelyn. And you're not a ghost." Evelyn reached across the console, her fingers interlaced with his. The touch was electric, a brief moment of warmth in a world that had turned freezing. This wasn't just corporate loyalty anymore. It was a shared defiance. As they neared the sprawling iron gates of the estate, the tension escalated. Jack knew they couldn't just drive through the front. He pulled the car into a wooded thicket half a mile away. "We have to go in through the old servants' tunnel," Evelyn whispered. "It leads directly under the library. But it hasn't been used in years. It might be blocked." "We'll make it through," Jack promised. They hiked through the dense undergrowth, the damp earth clinging to their shoes. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. As they reached the stone entrance of the tunnel, Jack spotted a flickering light in the distance. Security patrols with high-powered flashlights were scouring the perimeter. They were running out of time. Inside the tunnel, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rot. Jack led the way, using his phone's flashlight to cut through the oppressive darkness. "Wait," Evelyn hissed, pulling him back. A red laser dot danced across the stone wall inches from Jack's head. A motion-activated security grid. Noah hadn't just left the estate to guards. He'd turned it into a fortress. "I can bypass the relay," Jack said, his mind clicking into the technical expertise he'd honed over years of managing Thorne's infrastructure. "But I need you to hold the wires. If your hand shakes, the alarm goes to the main house." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She stepped into the narrow space with him, their bodies pressed together in the cramped, cold tunnel. Jack's breath caught as he looked down at her. In the dim light, the fear in her eyes was being replaced by a fierce, desperate resolve. He worked quickly, his fingers brushing against hers as they manipulated the delicate copper strands. For a heartbeat, the proximity was overwhelming. The scent of her perfume mixed with the rain, the heat of her skin against the chill of the tunnel. "Got it," he whispered as the red light flickered and died. They moved deeper into the bowels of the estate, but as they reached the ladder leading up to the library, Jack found a discarded folder near the base of the stairs. He opened it, expecting more financial records. Instead, he found surveillance photos. Of him. Photos of Jack at his apartment, Jack at the grocery store, Jack visiting his mother's grave. Noah Cross hadn't just been watching Evelyn. He had been vetting Jack for months, waiting for the moment he could use him as a scapegoat. The discrepancies weren't just meant to ruin Evelyn. They were designed to look like Jack had been the one manipulating her. The realization was a gut punch. They weren't just fighting for her life. They were fighting to clear Jack's name from a crime he hadn't even known existed. By the way, have you ever felt like someone was 2 steps ahead of you no matter how hard you tried? It's a terrifying feeling. If you're enjoying the way this mystery is unfolding, drop a comment with the word justice below. It really helps the channel grow, and I love seeing who's still with us. "He's framed me," Jack whispered, showing her the photos. If we fail tonight, I'm the one who goes to prison for the embezzlement. He's already built the paper trail. Evelyn looked at the photos, her face hardening. Then we don't fail. We find that birth certificate's origin and we find the child. That's the only leverage that can stop him. They climbed the ladder and emerged into the darkened library. The room was silent, smelling of expensive leather and old secrets. But as Jack moved toward the hidden safe behind the portrait of Noah's late wife, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The heavy oak doors of the library creaked open. I knew you'd come here, Evelyn, a voice boomed, calm, cold, and terrifyingly familiar. It wasn't Noah Cross. It was Hollis Mulray. He wasn't just the head of security. He was holding a silenced pistol, and he wasn't looking at Evelyn. He was looking directly at Jack with a look of predatory satisfaction. Your father is very disappointed, Evelyn, Hollis said, stepping into the room. But he's willing to be merciful. If you walk out now, the boy here gets a quick end. If you stay, well, the sanitarium has plenty of room for two. The tension had reached a breaking point. They were trapped in the heart of the enemy's territory, the romantic spark between them now a flickering candle in a hurricane of betrayal. The cold barrel of Hollis's weapon gleamed under the library's dim sconces. Jack felt the world narrow down to the millimeter of steel between him and a permanent end. Evelyn stepped forward, her body instinctively moving to shield Jack, a gesture of raw courage that shattered the last of their professional barriers. Put it down, Hollis, Evelyn commanded, her voice vibrating with a power she hadn't possessed that morning. Your family. You're not a murderer. Hollis laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Family is a business arrangement, Evelyn. Your father understood that when he sent me to watch you. He knew you were weak. He knew you'd fall for a nobody like this guy. Hollis shifted the gun, but before he could squeeze the trigger, a heavy thud echoed from the corridor. The library doors swung open once more and a tall, gaunt figure stepped into the light. It was Noah Cross himself. He walked with a cane, but his presence filled the room like a suffocating fog. That's enough, Hollis, Noah said smoothly. I'll handle this. Noah walked toward the desk, ignoring the weapon and the tension. He looked at Jack with a terrifying sort of respect. You've done well, Jack Dawson. Most men in your position would have sold her out for a six-figure severance hours ago. You've shown character. I'm not for sale, Jack spat, his hand tightening around the heavy brass paperweight he'd grabbed from the desk. Everyone is for sale, Noah countered, his eyes turning to Evelyn. But let's talk about the truth, shall we? You think you found a secret. You think there's a brother hidden away and that I'm the villain of this story. Noah reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a worn, yellowed photograph. He tossed it onto the mahogany desk. Evelyn stepped forward, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Jack looked over her shoulder. It wasn't a photo of a child. It was a photo of a woman who looked exactly like Evelyn, standing in front of a clinic Jack recognized from the birth certificate's letterhead. That's my mother, Evelyn whispered. But she died when I was born. That's what I told you, Noah said, his voice dropping to a low melodic growl. But the truth is far more profitable and far more tragic. Your mother didn't die in childbirth, Evelyn. She's alive. She's been in that sanitarium for 25 years. And the child on that birth certificate? The one I've been funneling money to protect. Noah leaned in, his face inches from Evelyn's. That wasn't your brother. That was your child, Evelyn. The one you were told was a stillbirth 10 years ago when you were just a girl, and I decided he didn't fit the image of the Thorne heiress. The revelation hit like a physical explosion. The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn's knees buckled and Jack caught her, his arms wrapping around her as she let out a sound that wasn't a cry, but a primal moan of agony. The discrepancies in the books weren't a cover-up for a brother. Noah had been using the company's wealth to keep Evelyn's son hidden from her, paying for a high-security life in total isolation, all while letting Evelyn believe her baby was dead. He hadn't just stolen her company. He had stolen her motherhood, her sanity, and her soul. He's alive. Evelyn choked out, her eyes searching Noah's face for a lie. My son is alive? He's alive and he's healthy, Noah said with a sickening smile. And he's the only reason you're going to sign this confession of embezzlement. You sign the papers, you take the fall, and I'll let you see him. You refuse, and he disappears. Truly disappears this time. Jack felt a rage he had never known. The manipulation was so deep, so twisted, it transcended corporate greed. This was pure, unadulterated evil. He looked at Evelyn, who was staring at the legal documents on the desk as if they were her only lifeline to a ghost. "Don't do it, Evelyn," Jack whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "If you sign, he'll kill us both anyway. He can't leave witnesses to this." "But my son," she sobbed. "We'll find him," Jack promised, his voice a steel vow. "I swear to you we will find him. But we have to get out of here alive first." The midpoint revelation had changed everything. It wasn't about an audit anymore. It was a rescue mission for a life Evelyn thought was lost to the grave. The stakes were no longer just high, they were infinite. Are you guys as shocked as I am? I mean, we all knew Noah Cross was bad, but this? To tell a mother her child is dead just to keep her focused on a company? If you think Jack and Evelyn need to take this man down right now, type truth in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. This story is about to head into the darkest territory yet. Noah signaled to Hollis. "Take them to the basement. If she hasn't signed by dawn, execute the assistant. We'll see how long her resolve lasts when his blood is on the floor." The basement of the Mulray estate was a cold, windowless concrete vault that smelled of damp earth and old oil. It was a place designed for forgotten things. Hollis had stripped Jack of his phone and his coat, leaving him in a thin shirt as he shoved them into the cell. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a finality that echoed like a casket lid closing. For the first time since the night began, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the crushing weight of their reality. Evelyn collapsed onto the single wooden bench, her body racked with silent, violent tremors. She didn't cry out, she simply stared at the gray wall, her eyes hollow. The revelation that her son was alive, yet held as a pawn by her own father, had broken something fundamental inside her. 10 years, she whispered, her voice a ghostly rasp. "I spent 10 years visiting a small headstone in the rain." "Talk to it, Jack." "I told that piece of granite my secrets. And all the while he was breathing. He was growing up somewhere without a mother because I wasn't ready to lead his empire with a child in tow." Jack moved to her, kneeling on the cold floor. He took her hands in his. They were like ice. "He did it because he's afraid of you, Evelyn. He knew that if you had something to love more than the company, he couldn't control you. This isn't your fault. It's his sin." "It doesn't matter," she said, looking at him with a despair so deep it felt like a physical vacuum. "He's going to kill you at dawn. And I'll sign that paper and I'll be his prisoner for the rest of my life just to see my boy for 5 minutes. He won. He's always won." This was the breaking point. Separated from the world, facing execution and buried under the weight of a decade of lies, hope seemed like a cruel joke. Jack looked around the cell. There were no hidden tools, no loose bricks, no cinematic escapes. Just the two of them and the ticking clock of a sunrise they were never meant to see. The romantic tension that had been building now transformed into something desperate and somber. In the shadow of death, the barriers of status and pride vanished. Jack reached up, gently cupping her face. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She turned her gaze to him. "I'm a miner's son from a town that doesn't exist on most maps. I've spent my life being invisible, thinking that was safety. But meeting you, helping you, it's the first time I felt like I was actually standing in the light. If this is where it ends, I don't regret a single second of it." Evelyn leaned into his touch, a sob finally breaking through her stoicism. She pulled him closer, burying her face in the crook of his neck. They held each other in the dark, two lost souls clinging to the only truth they had left, each other. For a few hours, the corporate war and the missing child were pushed back by the simple, agonizing intimacy of their shared heartbeat. But the darkness wasn't just physical. At 4 a.m., the small speaker in the corner of the ceiling crackled to life. Noah's voice, distorted and cold, filled the room. "1 hour, Evelyn. I've already sent the transfer papers to the board. Your son is being moved to a new location as we speak. If you don't sign by 5 a.m., you'll never find him. Not in this lifetime." The hopelessness was absolute. Jack felt Evelyn's grip tighten until it hurt. They were being squeezed by a giant and they had nothing to fight back with. No evidence, no allies, and no way out. "I have to ask you guys, have you ever felt like you were at the absolute end of your rope? Like the world was closing in and there was no light at the end of the tunnel? That's where Jack and Evelyn are right now. If you're praying for a miracle, Drop a hope in the comments. And please, if you want to see how they find the strength to fight back, make sure you're subscribed. The darkest hour is always just before the dawn. As the first faint light of morning began to bleed through the tiny barred slit at the top of the foundation wall, Jack saw something. Not a tool but a memory. He remembered the surveillance photos Noah had shown him, the photos of Jack at his mother's grave. He realized why Noah had chosen him as the scapegoat. It wasn't just because he was an assistant. It was because of the specific bank account Jack's mother had left him. A dormant small-town credit union account that Noah had been using as a pass-through for the sanitarium payments without Jack ever knowing. The darkest hour had revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The evidence wasn't in the estate. It was in Jack's own pocket, on a laminated bank card Noah's men had neglected to take because they thought it was worthless. The realization hit Jack like a surge of pure adrenaline. He fumbled for his wallet, his fingers trembling as he pulled out the worn blue plastic card for the small-town credit union back home. To Hollis and Noah, this was a piece of trash, a relic of a dead woman's meager savings. But to Jack it was a GPS. "Evelyn, look," Jack whispered, his voice gaining a sudden sharp edge. "The routing number on this card. It's linked to the dormant account my mother left me. Last month I got a notification about a strange deposit I couldn't explain. I thought it was a bank error so I ignored it. But it wasn't an error. Noah has been using my name and my family's identity to pay the sanitarium's private security." Evelyn looked at the card, her eyes widening as the fog of despair began to lift. "If he's using your account to pay them, then the transaction history. It has the physical address of the payee," Jack finished. "The sanitarium isn't just a name. It's a registered business entity receiving monthly wire transfers from this specific account. If we can get to a computer, any computer, I can log in and find exactly where they're holding your son." Hope, fragile and bright, flickered back into Evelyn's eyes. She stood up, her spine straightening. The victim was gone, the CO was back. "We don't just need a computer, Jack. We need a way out of this cage." Just then the heavy iron bolt on the door screeched. Hollis entered, followed by 2 guards. He held a silver tray with a single sheet of paper and a fountain pen. The morning sun was beginning to bleed through the upper vents, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. "Time's up," Hollis said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Sign the confession, Evelyn. Or Jack learns how deep the estate's well really is." Evelyn didn't look at the paper. She looked at Jack, a silent message passing between them. They had spent years communicating in the margins of board meetings. They didn't need words now. She stepped toward Hollis, her hand reaching for the pen, but as her fingers brushed the metal, she pivoted. She didn't grab the pen, she grabbed the heavy silver tray and swung it with every ounce of her bottled-up rage, catching Hollis squarely in the jaw. "Tao!" she screamed. Jack didn't hesitate. He lunged at the first guard, using the momentum of his coal miner father's strength. A strength he had tried to hide under tailored suits for years. He tackled the man into the concrete wall, the air leaving the guard's lungs in a sickening wheeze. The second guard reached for his holster, but Jack was faster, grabbing the heavy wooden bench and shoving it into the man's knees. In the chaos, Jack scooped up the fallen guard's sidearm. He didn't fire, he didn't have to. The sight of the weapon, combined with the sheer primal fury in Jack's eyes, made the remaining guard freeze. "The keys," Jack commanded, his voice a low growl. Within seconds they were out of the cell, leaving a groggy Hollis locked in the very cage he'd intended for them. They sprinted through the basement corridors, but they weren't headed for the exit. "The library," Evelyn gasped as they climbed the service stairs. "The private server. If we can get in there, you can trace the account." They burst into the library just as the house's internal alarms began to wail. Jack dived behind the mahogany desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard of Noah's personal terminal. His heart was a drum, his vision tunneling. Come on, he hissed. The screen flickered. Access denied. He tried again, bypassing the first layer of encryption using the same bypass code he'd seen Noah use a dozen times for emergency audits. Accepted. The transaction history scrolled down the screen in a blur of blue text. Jack's eyes scanned the data, looking for the routing number on his card. There was a monthly payment of $50,000 to a facility called St. Jude's Rest. I have it, Jack cried out. It's in the valley. Less than 20 miles from here. Evelyn leaned over him, her hand on his shoulder. The warmth of her touch was no longer desperate. It was a seal of a pact. They were no longer running from a secret. They were hunting the truth. "Let's go get my son," she said. But as they turned to leave, the monitors on the desk shifted to the outdoor security feed. Noah Cross was standing by his car in the driveway, surrounded by a dozen armed men. He looked directly into the camera, a cold, knowing smile on his face. He knew they were in the library. He knew they had the address. And he was waiting for them to try and leave. "What do you guys think? Is it a trap or is it their only shot? I've never seen a turning point this intense. If you're screaming at your screen for them to make it out, let me know in the comments. Type, run, if you think they can break through. And please, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. We are heading into the final confrontation and you won't believe the twist that's coming." "He thinks he's trapped us," Jack said, looking at the arsenal of security outside. He turned to Evelyn, a daring plan forming in his mind. "He thinks we're going to use the front door. But he forgot one thing." "What?" "He forgot that I'm the one who installed the fire suppression system in this house," Jack said, a grim smile touching his lips. "And I know exactly how to turn this library into a smoke screen." The library air was suddenly thick, not with the smell of old books, but with the sharp chemical tang of the fire suppression gas. Jack had bypassed the heat sensors, triggering a total localized lockdown. Thick, white clouds billowed from the ceiling vents, turning the opulent room into a sightless void. "Hold my belt," Jack whispered to Evelyn. "I know the floor plan by heart. We're going through the floor." He didn't mean the tunnel. He meant the heavy-duty dumbwaiter used for moving crates of vintage wine from the cellar to the library. It was a tight squeeze, a literal metal coffin, but as the security team breached the library doors, coughing and firing blindly into the mist, Jack and Evelyn descended into the darkness of the house's guts. They emerged in the garage, a cathedral of silver and chrome. Jack bypassed the ignition of Noah's armored sedan, the engine roaring to life like a caged beast. "Brace yourself," Jack barked. He slammed the car into reverse, shattering the heavy oak garage doors and tearing down the driveway. Noah's men scrambled, their bullets pinging harmlessly off the reinforced glass. Jack didn't slow down. He drove like a man possessed, weaving through the estate's statues and manicured hedges until they hit the open road. The drive to St. Jude's Rest was a blur of high-speed turns and gut-wrenching tension. Evelyn was silent, her knuckles white as she clutched the photo of her mother. Behind them, the headlights of Noah's pursuit vehicles flickered like the eyes of wolves. "They're gaining," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "Let them," Jack replied, his eyes fixed on the looming stone gates of the sanitarium ahead. "They can't stop us in a public place. Not with what I'm about to do." As they screeched into the gravel courtyard of St. Jude's, Jack didn't stop the car. He drove straight toward the main entrance, slamming on the brakes at the last possible second. He grabbed his phone, which he'd snatched back from the library desk, and hit send on a pre-drafted email. "What was that?" Evelyn asked. "The entire transaction history, the birth certificate, and the location of this facility," Jack said. "Sent to the 3 largest news syndicates in the country. If we don't walk out of here in 10 minutes, the whole world sees what Noah Cross is." They burst through the front doors of the facility. The staff, stunned and confused, tried to block them, but Evelyn moved with the authority of a queen reclaiming her throne. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice echoing off the sterile white walls. "Where is my son?" At the end of the long, clinical hallway, a door opened. Noah Cross stepped out, flanked by Hollis, who was sporting a bloodied bandage on his jaw. Noah looked tired, the mask of the untouchable titan finally beginning to crack. "You're too late, Evelyn," Noah said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "The boy doesn't even know who you are. To him, you're just a face on a corporate billboard. You'll destroy his world if you take him now." "I'm not taking him," Evelyn said, stepping right into her father's space. "I'm saving him from you." Just then a small boy no older than 10, peeked out from behind the door. He had Evelyn's eyes, the same piercing, intelligent gaze. He held a wooden plane, his movements hesitant. "Mommy," the boy whispered. The word hung in the air, a fragile bridge over a decade of lies. Evelyn froze, her heart visibly breaking and mending in the same breath. "Stay back." Hollis growled, reaching for his weapon. But Jack was already there. He didn't use a gun. He used the truth. He held up his phone showing the sent receipt of the email. The police are 4 minutes away, Hollis. The press is 6 minutes behind them. You can pull that trigger, but you'll be doing it on a live feed to the national news. Look up. Jack pointed to the security camera in the corner. He had hacked the facility's internal network the moment they entered the Wi-Fi zone. Hollis looked at Noah. Noah looked at the boy. For the first time in his life, Noah Cross realized he had run out of moves. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound Jack had ever heard. It was the sound of a kingdom falling. Go to him, Evelyn, Jack said softly. Evelyn ran. She didn't look at her father, didn't look at the guards. She dropped to her knees and gathered the boy into her arms, a sob of pure, unadulterated triumph escaping her. This is the moment, guys. The justice we've been waiting for. The look on Noah's face as he realizes his money can't buy his way out of this. It's everything. If you believe that no one is above the law, I want you to flood the comments with victory. And if you're as moved by this reunion as I am, please hit that subscribe button. We have one more chapter to go, the aftermath. Noah Cross turned away, his shoulders slumped as the distant wail of sirens began to fill the valley. He had lost his company, his reputation, and his leverage. But Jack Dawson, the man who was supposed to be a footnote, stood tall. He walked over to Evelyn and the boy, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. The silence was finally over. And for the first time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like peace. The morning sun had fully crested the horizon, bathing the stone walls of St. Jude's Rest in a warm golden hue that seemed to wash away the clinical coldness of the past decade. The courtyard was a hive of activity, not the frantic, dangerous energy of the night before, but the orderly chaos of justice. Police cruisers and black press vans lined the driveway, their flashing lights a beacon for a truth that could no longer be suppressed. Noah Cross and Hollis Mulray were led away in handcuffs, their faces grim and silent. The empire of Thorn Industries would spend the next few years in the hands of receivers and investigators. But for the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't care about the stock price. She sat on the rear bumper of an ambulance, wrapped in a thick wool blanket with the boy, whose name she discovered was Danny, tucked tightly against her side. Danny was eating a chocolate bar provided by a kind-hearted paramedic, looking up at Evelyn with a mix of wonder and instinctive recognition. The bond that had been severed by a father's greed was knitting itself back together in the quiet light of day. Jack stood a few feet away talking to a lead investigator. He had handed over the digital trail of the embezzlement and the secret payments, ensuring that his name, and the memory of his mother, was cleared once and for all. When he finished, he walked over to Evelyn. He looked exhausted, his suit jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up and his face bruised, but his eyes were clear. The police have secured the facility's records, Jack said, his voice soft so as not to startle the boy. They found the original documents. Your mother is being transferred to a private medical center in the city this afternoon. She's going to be okay, Evelyn. She's going to see her grandson. Evelyn looked up at him, and for the first time since he had known her, the CO mask was gone completely. There was only the woman, raw, grateful, and undeniably beautiful in her relief. She reached out and took Jack's hand, pulling him closer. I don't know how to thank you, Jack, she whispered. You risked everything. You could have been killed. You could have been in prison. Jack looked down at their joined hands. I told you. I didn't do it for the company. I did it because you weren't a number. He paused, a small, genuine smile tugging at his lips. And honestly, I think I'm done with the corporate world. I think I might go back to that town in the mountains and see if I can't build something that actually matters. Evelyn stood up, keeping Danny's hand in hers, but she didn't let go of Jack. If you're going back there, you're going to need someone to help with the logistics. And I happen to know a very talented boy who's looking for a fresh start. The romantic tension that had carried them through the darkness finally settled into a deep, peaceful understanding. There were no grand declarations needed. The shared trauma and the shared victory had forged a connection deeper than any office romance could ever reach. As the cameras flashed in the distance and the world prepared to feast on the scandal of the century, Jack and Evelyn turned their backs on the noise. They walked toward Jack's dented sedan, the one that had carried them through the night, and drove away. The silence between them was back. But this time it wasn't a wall. It was a bridge. It was the silence of a new beginning, of a mother and son finding their rhythm, and of a man who had finally stepped out of the shadows to find a life worth living in the light. Thank you so much for following this journey with us. This was a story about the masks we wear and the courage it takes to tear them off. If you were moved by Jack and Evelyn's victory, please leave a comment below telling us what your favorite part was. I love hearing from you. And if you want more stories of justice, love, and redemption, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're the reason we tell these stories. See you in the next one. Story end.